Get out of the car. Now.
Officer, I'm actively serving military. My hands are up. Can you tell me what's going on?
I'm giving you a lawful order. Get out or I'm going to tase you.
Two officers stood on either side of a black SUV on a dark Virginia highway, their flashlights cutting through the night, their weapons drawn. The driver's hands were clearly visible, raised high and pressed against the roof of his vehicle. He was wearing a U.S. Army uniform, his lieutenant bars catching the light from the patrol car's high beams. Everything about his posture communicated compliance. Everything about theirs communicated aggression. What happened next would be captured in devastating clarity on 2 dashcams and 1 body camera. A decorated Army officer, a combat veteran with 2 Bronze Stars, pepper-sprayed and tased while following commands, his service to the country meaning nothing to officers who saw only the color of his skin. But what officers Blake Thornton and Connor Fairbanks didn't know was that their actions that night would trigger something far larger than a civil lawsuit. The Department of Justice was watching, and what those cameras captured would result in federal criminal charges that would reshape police accountability in Virginia forever. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Captain Desmond Whitlock had served in the United States Army for 11 years. He'd completed 3 deployments to Afghanistan, earned 2 Bronze Stars for valor under fire, and was currently assigned to Fort Lee as a logistics officer overseeing supply operations for the entire eastern seaboard. He'd grown up in Newport News, Virginia, the son of a Navy veteran and a schoolteacher, and he'd known since childhood that he wanted to serve his country. At 33, he was on track for promotion to major. His service record was spotless, his evaluations glowing, his commitment to duty unquestioned. He'd seen combat, led men under fire, made split-second decisions that saved lives. He understood authority, understood chain of command, understood the difference between lawful orders and abuse of power. That December evening, Captain Whitlock was driving back to base after visiting his mother for dinner. He'd taken the rural route through Isle of Wight County, a decision he'd made hundreds of times before. His black Chevy Tahoe was brand new, a purchase he'd made 3 weeks earlier to celebrate his upcoming promotion. The temporary license plate was properly displayed in the rear window, exactly where Virginia law required it. At 6:47 p.m., he noticed flashing lights in his rearview mirror. Captain Whitlock did what any reasonable person would do on a dark, unlit stretch of rural highway. He slowed down, activated his turn signal, and looked for a well-lit area to pull over safely. The nearest gas station was less than 2 miles ahead. He drove exactly 1.7 miles at 25 miles per hour with his interior dome light on and his hands visible on the steering wheel. Officer Blake Thornton had been with the Isle of Wight County Sheriff's Department for 7 years. His personnel file contained 14 citizen complaints alleging excessive force, racial profiling, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Each complaint had been investigated by Internal Affairs. Each investigation had been closed without discipline. His supervisors described him as intense but effective, praising his arrest numbers while ignoring the pattern of violence that produced them. Thornton had developed a reputation among certain residents of Isle of Wight County. Black drivers learned to avoid certain roads during his shifts. Ministers warned their congregations. Parents told their teenagers to always have their phones recording if they were pulled over by the officer with the shaved head and the thin smile. Officer Connor Fairbanks had been Thornton's partner for 2 years. He had 3 complaints in his file, all connected to incidents involving Thornton. Internal Affairs had noted a troubling pattern but recommended only additional training. That training had never been completed. When Captain Whitlock's SUV didn't immediately stop, Thornton's voice came through the radio, captured on his own dashcam audio. He's running. Black male, black SUV, evading, request backup. He wasn't running, he was looking for a safe place to stop. But Thornton had already decided what was happening, already constructed a narrative that justified whatever came next. By the time Captain Whitlock pulled into the BP gas station at 6:52 p.m., both officers had their weapons drawn. Their dashcams captured the approach from 2 angles, the gas station's overhead lights providing clear visibility. A third angle came from Fairbanks's body camera, activated when he exited his vehicle. The footage showed Captain Whitlock's hands raised through the driver's side window before the officers even reached his vehicle. His dome light was on. His engine was off. His posture was complete, total compliance. License and registration, Thornton shouted, his weapon aimed at Whitlock's head. The dashcam captured his aggressive stance, his finger positioned near the trigger guard. Officer, I'm reaching for my wallet in my back pocket, Captain Whitlock said, his voice calm, his movements deliberate and slow. The body camera captured his announcement, the careful way he narrated every movement. "Don't reach for anything, keep your hands up." Captain Whitlock froze, hands pressed against the roof. "I need to reach for my wallet to give you my license. Can you tell me how you'd like me to proceed?" Thornton moved closer, his face now visible on Fairbanks's body camera. "Get out of the car." "Officer, can you please tell me what I did wrong? I'll comply with everything, but I'd like to know what's happening." "You're evading arrest. You've been driving without plates. Get out of the car now." Captain Whitlock's voice remained steady, even as fear crept in. "Sir, my temporary plates are properly displayed in the rear window. I wasn't evading. I was looking for a well-lit area. I'm active military. You can see my uniform." The camera captured Thornton's expression changing, something hardening behind his eyes. "I don't care what you claim to be. Get out of the car." "I'm afraid to get out," Captain Whitlock said quietly, the words captured with perfect clarity on all three recordings. "Honestly, I'm afraid. Can you please tell me what's going on?" Thornton's response would become the defining soundbite of the case, played in courtrooms and on news programs across the country. "Yeah, you should be. Should police officers face federal charges for using excessive force against compliant citizens? Comment your thoughts below. This wasn't just brutality. This was a decorated combat veteran treated like a criminal for driving while black, and the Department of Justice was about to make an example. What happened next was captured from 3 angles in horrifying detail. Thornton reached through the window and attempted to open the door from the inside. His dashcam showed his arm entering the vehicle. Fairbanks's body camera captured Captain Whitlock's hands remaining raised, never moving from the roof of the car. "Keep your hands up," Fairbanks shouted, his weapon now also aimed at Whitlock. "My hands are up," Captain Whitlock replied, the confusion evident in his voice. "They're up." Thornton pulled out his pepper spray and discharged it directly into Captain Whitlock's face without warning. The body camera captured the orange stream, captured Whitlock's head jerking back, captured his hands finally moving to cover his eyes in instinctive reaction to the chemical assault. "Get out of the car," Thornton screamed. "I can't see," Whitlock gasped, his hands now at his face, his eyes burning. The pain was evident in his voice, but even then, even blinded by pepper spray, he didn't resist. He reached for the door handle, trying to comply. "Stop reaching," Fairbanks shouted. "You told me to get out," Whitlock said, his voice breaking. "I'm trying to comply. I can't see." The door opened. Captain Whitlock stepped out, his army uniform now visible in full, his hands raised again despite the burning in his eyes. The rank insignia was clearly visible on his collar. The U.S. Army tape was clearly visible above his right pocket. None of it mattered. "Get on the ground," Thornton ordered. Captain Whitlock began to lower himself, moving slowly, carefully, blindly, his knees touched the concrete. His hands moved to brace himself. Thornton drew his taser. The body camera captured his arm extending, captured the red laser dot appearing on Captain Whitlock's back. Taser. 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 The barbs struck Captain Whitlock between his shoulder blades. 50,000 volts coursed through his body. He collapsed face first onto the gas station pavement, his body convulsing, his muscles contracting involuntarily. "Stop resisting," Thornton shouted, even as Whitlock lay immobilized by electricity. "I'm not resisting," Whitlock managed to say through clenched teeth, the words barely audible but captured on audio. "I'm a soldier. I'm not resisting." Thornton tased him again. 5 seconds of electrical current while Captain Whitlock lay prone on the ground, his hands now being wrenched behind his back by Fairbanks. The second tasing was captured on all 3 cameras. There was no resistance. There was no threat. There was only a decorated army officer, face down on concrete, being electrocuted for the crime of driving while black. The arrest took 4 minutes and 37 seconds from the first discharge of pepper spray to the final click of handcuffs. Captain Whitlock was charged with eluding police, obstruction of justice, and failure to display proper registration. Every charge was a lie. At the Isle of Wight County Jail, Captain Whitlock was photographed, fingerprinted, and processed. His uniform was taken. His dignity was stripped. His exemplary military record meant nothing in a system that had already decided he was a criminal. He was held for 8 hours before being released on bond. The next morning, still bearing the burn marks from the taser and the residual effects of pepper spray, Captain Whitlock contacted an attorney. 4 days later, he contacted the Virginia ACLU. 6 days after that, the story reached the Department of Justice. The investigation moved with unusual speed. Federal prosecutors subpoenaed all dashcam and body camera footage within 72 hours. They obtained personnel files for both officers, discovering the documented patterns of complaints and the systematic failure to discipline. They interviewed witnesses at the gas station who described what they'd seen. They examined Captain Whitlock's military record and found a decorated veteran who had served his country with distinction. The footage was released to the public 2 months after the incident. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed 45 million times. The nation watched a U.S. Army captain in uniform, with his hands raised, pepper sprayed and tased while complying with every command. The state charges against Captain Whitlock were dropped within a week of the video's release. The prosecutor, facing overwhelming evidence of his innocence, dismissed all counts and issued a public apology. But the federal government wasn't finished. Department of Justice attorneys presented the case to a federal grand jury in Richmond. The charges were severe: deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal felony carrying up to 10 years in prison, conspiracy against rights, use of unreasonable force, obstruction of justice for the false report Thornton had filed, claiming Whitlock had evaded arrest and resisted. Officer Blake Thornton was arrested at his home at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, federal marshals placing him in handcuffs while his family watched. Officer Connor Fairbanks was arrested at the sheriff's department, taken into custody in front of his colleagues. The arrest sent shockwaves through Virginia law enforcement. Federal prosecution of police officers was rare. Federal prosecution based on body camera evidence showing clear abuse of a compliant military veteran was unprecedented. The trial began 14 months after the incident. The courtroom was packed with military veterans, civil rights advocates, and journalists from every major news outlet. Captain Whitlock, now Major Whitlock following his promotion, sat in the front row in his dress uniform. The prosecution's case was built on the footage. They played all 3 recordings simultaneously, showing the jury exactly what had happened from every angle. They brought in use of force experts who testified that nothing Captain Whitlock did justified the deployment of pepper spray, let alone the taser. They presented the false police report and demonstrated, line by line, how it contradicted the video evidence. The defense argued that Thornton had perceived a threat, that the delay in stopping was concerning, that officers make split-second decisions under stress. But the footage demolished every argument. The jury watched Captain Whitlock's hands stay raised. They watched his compliance. They watched him announce every movement. They watched him get pepper sprayed and tased anyway. Thornton's own words played in the courtroom, captured on his body camera with devastating clarity. "Yeah, you should be." Those 4 words, spoken to a decorated combat veteran who had expressed fear for his life, encapsulated everything wrong with the encounter. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Thornton was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Fairbanks, who had pleaded guilty before trial in exchange for his testimony, received 18 months. The federal conviction was historic, one of the first successful DOJ prosecutions of police officers based primarily on body camera evidence. Legal scholars called it a turning point. Civil rights organizations called it long overdue. The civil lawsuit followed the criminal case. Major Whitlock sued Isle of Wight County, the sheriff's department, both officers individually, and the supervisors who had ignored years of complaints. His attorneys presented evidence of 14 prior incidents involving Thornton, each one dismissed without discipline, each one documented in personnel files that proved the department knew about his pattern of abuse. The county's attorneys calculated their exposure and requested settlement negotiations. The parties reached an agreement 7 months after the criminal verdict. Major Whitlock received $3.7 million in compensatory and punitive damages. But more importantly, the settlement required comprehensive reforms. Mandatory de-escalation training for all officers, independent civilian oversight with investigation power, automatic review of any use of force incident by an outside agency, zero-tolerance policy for officers with multiple complaints, including mandatory reassignment pending investigation. The settlement also required the county to publicly release the personnel files of officers with sustained complaints, a transparency measure that had never been implemented in Virginia. Major Desmond Whitlock stood at a press conference in Richmond, flanked by his attorneys and his parents. His father, a Navy veteran of 24 years, stood at attention as his son spoke. "I served this country in Afghanistan. I served under fire. I was willing to give my life to protect the Constitution. And when I came home, I was pepper sprayed and tased by officers who saw my uniform and didn't care. Who saw my hands raised and didn't care. Who heard me say I was afraid and told me I should be." He paused, looking directly at the cameras. "I survived because I stayed calm. Because I didn't reach. Because I didn't run. But I shouldn't have to survive a traffic stop. No American should have to wonder if compliance will be enough to keep them alive. The press conference was viewed 28 million times. The video of the incident remained one of the most watched police misconduct recordings in history. Major Whitlock's calm narration of his movements, his repeated announcements of what he was doing, his desperate compliance captured something fundamental about the terror of driving while black in America. Major Whitlock used a portion of his settlement to establish the Whitlock Veterans Legal Defense Fund, providing free representation to military members and veterans who experienced civil rights violations. He testified before Congress about the need for federal oversight of police departments with documented patterns of abuse. He spoke at police academies about de-escalation, about the difference between authority and power, about what it means to serve. Officer Blake Thornton served 3 years and 2 months of his federal sentence. He was released to supervised probation, permanently prohibited from working in law enforcement. His law enforcement certification was revoked by the state of Virginia. Officer Connor Fairbanks completed his 18-month sentence and moved out of state. He never worked in law enforcement again. The Isle of Wight County Sheriff's Department underwent a complete leadership change. The sheriff resigned. 3 supervisors were terminated. The department's policies were rewritten under the supervision of a federal monitor appointed by the DOJ. The body camera footage became required viewing at Virginia's Police Academy, used as a case study in how not to conduct a traffic stop. It showed trainees the difference between lawful commands and abuse of authority, between reasonable suspicion and racial profiling, between protecting public safety and violating civil rights. And in communities across Virginia, the case of Major Desmond Whitlock became a symbol. A reminder that cameras cut both ways. That compliance isn't always enough. That badges don't grant immunity from federal prosecution. That the Department of Justice, when it chooses to act, can hold even armed agents of the state accountable for their crimes. Blake Thornton walked into that traffic stop believing his authority was absolute, that his badge protected him from consequences, that the man in the Army uniform was just another black driver to be controlled. He forgot that the cameras were recording. He forgot that federal prosecutors were watching. He forgot that the Constitution he claimed to enforce protected everyone equally, even decorated combat veterans driving home from dinner. Yeah, you should be. 4 words that cost him 4 years in federal prison. 4 words that proved what so many Americans already knew, that fear is the point, that terror is the tool, that some officers view their badge not as a responsibility but as a weapon. Major Desmond Whitlock survived because he knew how to survive, because he'd trained for high-stress situations, because he understood that any sudden movement could be his last. No American should need combat training to survive a traffic stop. If you believe that police officers who assault compliant citizens deserve federal prosecution, that body cameras must be mandatory for all law enforcement, and that military veterans deserve better from the country they served, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Tomorrow we have another story of courage meeting consequences, and you won't want to miss it, because the truth, captured on 3 cameras and proven in federal court, has the power to remind us all that no badge is above the law, and no service to country should end with your face pressed against the pavement, electricity coursing through your body, wondering if compliance will be enough to keep you alive.